Hi, this is Pat Johnson, your sociology instructor. In this mini lecture, we're going to talk about two general ways of doing research in sociology. One is called qualitative sociology, or qualitative research, and the other is called quantitative sociology, or quantitative research. The way I usually start this discussion in my seated classes is to ask my students about a hypothetical situation. Suppose someone calls you up and says, "Hey, I want you to study how that military base, which is right next door to our campus, we want you to study how that military base affects the county and the surrounding area." What would you do? Well, you could do qualitative research or you could do quantitative research. Let's look at these two types of research. When you conduct quantitative research, this is a way of conducting sociological research that draws on objective and statistical data. In other words, let's look at the root word of quantitative. It's quantity, isn't it? So in quantitative research, we are documenting trends, we're comparing subgroups, we're exploring correlations, we're making mathematical, statistical comparisons, we are using data that can be quantified. So if you were doing a survey and counting up how many people feel a certain way about something, you would be doing a quantitative survey. If you were doing a correlation and finding how two different variables are related to each other using a statistical formula, again, you would be doing a quantitative method of research. These are very objective types of research, and there's a whole host of statistical tests that can be done to either validate or to dismiss the researcher's hypotheses. I did quantitative research for my master's thesis. I surveyed students on how they thought they would do on a test, and I did analysis of what they based that idea of how well they would do on, and I did all sorts of statistical tests. That was a quantitative method of research. If we're doing qualitative research, in other words, if we're looking at qualitative methods in sociology, this relies on interview, on accounts, on observations of a person or a situation. This type of research sometimes looks at archival data. Qualitative research is more subjective. So if you do an interview with someone and you want to know how they feel about something, that would be qualitative. Now, you may be wondering why there's a Campbell's soup can here. I did some qualitative research when I was getting my undergraduate degree in sociology. I used archival data. In other words, I was comparing how one product, Campbell's soup, was being marketed to housewives before, during, and after World War II. So I went back and I looked at women's magazines from before, during, and after World War II and looked at the marketing strategies. It was really interesting. During World War II, Campbell's soup was marketed as something fast and nutritious for your family and relatively cheap. Before and after World War II, Campbell's soup focused more on the taste and the hominess and how the soup could be really good for your family. Do you see the two differences in the marketing? One was very marketed towards the working woman, and one was marketed more towards housewives who were not in the workforce. It was a qualitative method of doing research. So as we go about doing some exploration of different types of research, Remember that quantitative research looks at quantities. In other words, they're counting, they're doing statistical analysis of data. And qualitative research is more subjective and looking at how people feel about things, how they act in certain situations. It is not necessarily counting anything, but digging deeper into the human experience.